Reddit casino employee, what's the worst loss service you've ever seen? I'm a former casino employee and I've had a few episodes. I spend an hour and 20 minutes at the tables before the break. One guy went to the ATM 3 or 4 times and came back with about $200 each time. Each time he got more and more nervous. When he went to the desk for the last time, he said, "I have to go to the ATM." He was down to his last $50 and then brought the tab to $800. He was the only one at the table, and I said. He said, "Thanks, I really appreciate it," and walked away. He came back 10 minutes later and lost it all. He took off his shoes, put them on the table and said, "I want to tell you 2 things. Second, when I was trading, this man came to my table and cashed out $1,000 every time. He was the most aggressive person I had ever met. He was constantly showing his black card and telling me what an important person he was. When he went from $2,000 to $3,000, he got very aggressive and started blaming me. Every time he lost, after a while I would say, 'It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who you are.' He was laying out a lot of money on pit bosses and they weren't doing anything, and after I said that, he calmed down a little bit. When I got up from my seat, a young woman took my place, and when she heard him start doing the same thing to her that he was doing to me, she panicked. The pit boss came up to me to try to defuse the situation and I punched him. I heard he got a 5-year ban. A friend of mine worked at a casino in Las Vegas. One day, he said, a woman gambled away the entire family savings and her son's university fund. A few hours later, my friend went out for a break and ran into the woman and her son, who was about 17 or 18 years old, in the parking lot. The son was terribly upset and shouted all sorts of insults at her, screaming that she had ruined his life and that he would no longer be able to go to university because of her. He couldn't go to university because of her. At the same time, his mother is crying like a baby, begging him to stop yelling at her and apologize. My friend had to call security because the guy started attacking her, hitting her, slapping her and pulling her hair. However, when the security guard arrived, he saw her pulling out of the parking lot and possibly intentionally hitting her mother who was lying on the ground screaming for her to stop. I was very disappointed. My friend got heated at a poker table in a casino. Another man at the table was protesting loudly that he couldn't believe his friend's bad luck. Eventually the hand reached my friend and he turned to him and said. My friend said, "Haha, okay," but the man looked completely serious. When it was time to deal the cards, my friend showed his 2 threes. The man immediately jumped on my friend. My friend's friend must have been ready because he intercepted him and punched him before the security guards came and subdued the man. Laughter. How could P, who had lost at a skillful game, try to make up the difference with his hands? I will omit this as I am not a casino employee, but when I was in Las Vegas, I watched a tense blackjack game on Freeman Street. A man was on a winning streak and bet all his money, confident that this particular hand would double his winnings. Shockingly, he busted as soon as he paid out his chips. He slammed his hands on the table and said, "What the hell?" His girlfriend, dressed in a cheap tight mini dress and shoes with 7-inch heels, cried and screamed, saying he had promised to buy her a new purse with the money. A defenseless man was accidentally confronted by an enraged man. The chair flew upwards, the man who was confronted approached him and started saying, "Do you want one too?" Shouting started. At this point a heel was thrown into the loser's face, which hit him right in the head. I kept wanting to watch that throw, but my boyfriend said he didn't want to. Just as we were leaving the scene, 2 fierce-looking Las Vegas police officers were literally making their way through the crowd. It's probably too late, but I got a lot of good stuff. Not everything about casinos is negative or discouraging. Many poker players play it as a recreational activity, like golf. They make great friends and connections and it's a social thing. It's also a great way for paraplegics and others to increase their competitive spirit. At the poker table, an elderly man can barely play and usually loses up to $10,000. One day after a big win, when he won a huge pot with a bet of about $1,000, he had a heart attack. He collapsed on top of the dealer and an ambulance pulled up to him. Fortunately, the gambling doctor recognized his symptoms right away. He survived and continues to play, but he never had the opportunity to create and keep his winning record. To this day, this is the only time I have ever seen him walk away victorious. 2 men attempted suicide in a restroom. They threw a knife into the toilet tank, which hit an employee, which should have been a cry for help. He survived, but no one has seen him since. 3. Former millionaire. He would constantly ignore his cell phone and someone would call the casino and ask as if it was an emergency. Now he uses a different name to keep quiet and not feel awkward when a call comes in. Turns out the person who calls 1,000,000 times is my 8-year-old son. I saw a grown man about 3 years old who was not a gang member, always acting tough, losing big bets, crying at the table and asking for his money back. He just mumbled over and over that he was having a panic attack. That's what panic was. It was extremely embarrassing. I could go on endlessly. This was not an employee, but a drunk who lost and poured beer all over the slot machine. Needless to say, security arrived and he only spoke Spanish. They brought an interpreter, but he refused to speak at that point. They escorted him somewhere. Former casino employee, works in Reno. Saw a man who won a truck on a slot machine and in excitement, he hugged the machine, knocked it over and voided his game. He didn't win the track. He lost his mind and went into a rage. Security had to be called and security called the police. Honestly, it's a bit silly. It would have made more sense if he had knocked over the machine and hit the truck. I'm not a casino employee, but I saw a guy lose $18,000 on 3 rolls at a craps table and slam his beer on the floor. I lost about $60 on the same 3 shots. He drank my beer. The total was $17,940 plus beer. Around 1 a.m., when I got to keep parked for the deal, I had to evict the regular player because he was drunk and verbally abusive. Around 3 a.m., I packed up my stuff and went to my car to find that all my tires were slashed. Roadside assistance was too far away to help. I had to leave my car, take 2 cabs for $150, and spend $800 to buy new tires. It was a big blow to me, a student, and I decided to leave the industry. 2 months ago, I saw someone playing poker in London. The guy had been playing for hours and was very calm. He picked up a glass and smashed it on his face. He then started eating the broken glass. Security had to escort him out, but in the process he broke a window pane and started eating as much glass as he could grab. So they had to hold him until the ambulance arrived. Anyway, he should have been clean and stable. I never found out what happened to him after they took him to the ambulance. I had a friend who was not a casino worker, but swore horribly when he lost. One day he said, "My ass is bleeding, your deuces are too intense." So the dealer called the boss. The dealer said to the boss, "Do you have a Band-Aid? This guy's ass is bleeding. This is the best one. I've been working at the casino for almost 4 years. I don't know how much these people have lost, but I know the results." One guy jumped off the back of a parking lot and no one could find him for days. That scene is not hard to imagine. Another was in a high-limit room, and this person started shooting at the ceiling. It was a horrible night. He didn't injure anyone, but a lot of people got hurt in the crush. The guy ended up killing someone that day and went crazy before he was caught. He died in jail a few days later. Casinos are the worst place to work, but only if you get tips. I really want to quit, but I need the money. I often play poker in casinos. One dealer told me a story he saw at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. A guy lost a big hand of $10,000 or so, ordered a sandwich, waited about 15 minutes for it to be brought to his table, and then threw it in the dealer's face. He also said he was only banned for 24 hours. I couldn't imagine having to deal with this customer again after he did that to me. Sandwiches are much better than bodily fluids like the ones mentioned in the other thread. Laughter. I worked in a casino in Queensland for 5 years. There was an old Austrian man there who regularly, 5 or more times a week, would play for 3 hours on a dollar machine with $1 per line, 25 lines and $25 a spin. By this point he had about $66,000. He sat down to have a beer or something, while a young man sat down, bet $20, displayed the feature and hit the jackpot on that machine. On the $20 bet, he won $235,000. The Austrian returned when the feature was displayed, lost, and began yelling that it was his machine and that he owed $6,000, spoiling like a child who had had his toys taken away. Security was called, but he continued to throw tantrums. The guard explained to him that he had no right to claim the money because there were a huge number of machines on the premises and that although he had played before, our machines do not have a reserve function, so once he moved away from the machine, he was no longer playing. He made a fuss and demanded to speak to the general manager. The security guard questioned his words too and told him to either calm the creep down or get rid of him. He told the guard, "Don't mess with me," and pushed him away. He was immediately detained by 3 guards and removed from the premises and banned from entering for 24 hours. He returned exactly 24 hours later and continued playing as if nothing had happened. In the early 2000s, I received a report of an unoccupied car in the parking lot. When I arrived on the scene, the driver's side door was open, the radio was working, and there was a large amount of cash lying on the passenger seat. I called for backup to secure the funds, smoked a cigarette while waiting, leaned against the wall and looked toward the garage. That's when I saw the missing owner fiddling in the street below. He was a school teacher and was about to be caught having sex with a female student. Miral, not an employee but the son-in-law of 2 gambling addicts, recalls the day her addiction switch went off when F took her on a vacation to Las Vegas. I have lived with my wife for 10 years and have seen M give the sign to stop gambling and then the sign goes off and she goes back to gambling. F doesn't pay for home repairs because it cuts into the gambling budget, she doesn't pay for repairs because it cuts into the gambling budget, she doesn't pay for repairs because it cuts into the gambling budget. He eats at the casino buffet for lunch and dinner. I feel like he's hurting my wife and it's hurting me. I was left alone as a child because my parents gambled all the time. Gambling is a terrible free will that destroys everything it touches. Instead of a dash, it was fill or mill and caps. I ran a poker room in a major Las Vegas casino for 10 years. I tried very hard to keep people from getting their lost money back. I told probably about 1,000 people, "We'll still be here tomorrow, go home and go to bed." I told Menorah to pay the bills and groceries first. He also paid his own cab fare. Bottom line is this, don't believe the hype. There are just as many people who are working to keep people on the land as there are who are not. You may say I'm one of the few, but I'm not. I know many like me, and even though I've moved back home to Hawaii, I know there are still plenty of people out there helping people find balance in bad times. After all, ending a relationship is bad for the soul and bad for business. It was never part of my plans. A few years ago I was playing poker in a casino, 5 out of 10 no-limit hold'em, and within about 2 hours I had taken 3 big pots from the same opponent every time. It was a case of me making an out bet, him folding, and me dropping a winning hand. In other words, when the other player folded, I was under no obligation to show my cards. When I took a 3rd big pot from him, I showed him my cards for fun and dealt a worthless hand. He claimed he folded a straight. He got very angry, jumped up and started walking around me yelling and screaming. Next time I have a good hand, call my razor. A security guard came over and nudged him. He agreed to stay calm. What happened next was something I deliberately provoked. I wanted to poke the bear and see if the man would actually lose his cool. He called my bet, and the two of us and the other man bet on the river. After a few bets and raises by me and the angry gentleman, the other man dropped his hand. The other guy folded his hand and I showed the table another silly hand. I think it was a flush. The angry gentleman jumped over the table and tried to hit me. Security was nearby and dragged him out of the poker room. He hit me several times and we saw them through the door. They held him on the floor with his knees against his neck for 20 minutes, waiting for the police. He was freaking out for the first few minutes, but then he tried to apologize and begged us not to involve the police. "Ha, you're a jackass, aren't you?" I would have done the same thing. Not me, but my friend's dad owns a casino in P. She visited him on New Year's Eve. Apparently one of his regular customers lost $1 million at the casino, and the father sent the customer $100,000 worth of champagne. The woman was apparently pleased. In generosity, let's say the bottle cost the hotel $40,000. That's a worthy gesture to satisfy the high rollers and make them want to come back. This post isn't so much about losing as it is about my parents' gambling addiction. My parents, both Asian, have been addicted to gambling for as long as I've been alive. I still remember nights when my parents would leave the house after midnight and leave me alone. When I woke up in the middle of the night or morning, no one was home. My parents would leave 4 to 6 times a night. My home life was always stressful because we never had that much money, but after my parents won the $227,000 jackpot and paid off the house, their addiction became even stronger. They wanted even more. My mother felt more responsible because she shelled out up to $1,000 at a time and sometimes got it back. My father wasn't as lucky because he was always bad at board games. My dad would spend money on slot machines and lose $1,000 at a time, getting into debt. Because of this problem, my parents divorced several times. There were many evenings when one of my parents would come home with his head hanging down, so upset that he wouldn't talk to me or each other and would lie about how much he actually spent. Sometimes I saw them crying and feeling guilty. I felt sad for my parents. When I turned 19, they took me to a casino to celebrate my birthday. Again, my parents were addicted to gambling. I just endlessly walked around the room, feeling very uneasy at the sight of people mindlessly pushing buttons with blank, tired faces. I felt bored because I had no desire to play. After losing $20, I sat down with my mom at a slot machine. She bet $100 at a time and lost in less than 10 minutes, and when she had lost about $500, she turned to me and said irritably, "You're bringing me bad luck." I felt sad. This gambler always believes that there is some external force that determines whether he wins or loses. A friend of mine jumped from a 3- or 4-story parking garage in Las Vegas, survived the fall but broke his face, leg, wrist, hand and ankle. After several nights in a Las Vegas hospital, he was airlifted by airplane to a hospital in his hometown, where he had no health insurance. The bill exceeded $100,000. Somehow his medical records were switched at the hospital and he didn't have to pay a dime. So I consider that a victory. He's walking fine now, he only has a few scars. He's a lucky man. There must have been a lot of elements in his armor that promoted good luck. I am not a casino employee. I am an EMT and was first on the scene of 2 suicidal jumps from traffic-controlled parking lots. It's safe to assume this didn't happen because I won a lot of money in Atlantic City. My ex-boyfriend worked as a security guard at a casino. One day he was trying to escort out a woman who was belligerent because she was constantly losing. Suddenly she bent over, pooped on the floor, picked it up and threw it at him. Then he walked away. I am a card dealer. I've gotten mad, cussed, lost my temper, but nothing serious. Before I started working at the casino, there were a couple of suicide attempts in the parking lot, but nothing like that. The worst I saw was when I was dealing Malbacar. One player ripped his cards into little pieces, tossed them in the air like confetti, and went crazy. I was betting on the Rib Orioles vs. White Sox game. This time it was 17 points in the 6th inning. I bet $30 and the game ended at 98 or so I made $900. There was an older guy sitting next to me who apparently decided that betting $5,000 on the White Sox was a good idea because it was safe. He smashed all 4 of my TVs and betting tablets and left. Laughter. I work for a company that provides casino apps for smartphones and computers. We don't win money, and we don't have to spend money to play. We regularly receive death threats, threats to kill ourselves if we don't give more free stuff, threats of violence, curses and prayers that we die an agonizing death. Indeed, some people are shining jewels. It is not uncommon to befriend some of them and develop a trusting relationship with them, but there are also hives of individuals. We regularly joke about how well we would play if we threatened them in a real casino. I'm not an employee, but I am a poker pro. I used to play 2-deck 5-bet no limit. It's a low-stakes game, and one guy lost $100 on a hand. He panicked and started banging on the table and yelling. I thought he might have a gun, and I actually got up out of my chair. It was that bad. I seriously feared for my safety and the safety of those around me. A friend of mine, who I will keep silent about as he is not an employee of the company, had been AWOL for some time. We searched for him for a long time and unfortunately found him 3 days later when he lost $45,000 in a casino. He was still a university student. He was lucky to have the support of his parents who helped him get back on his feet, but he should have been lucky because not many people get to make mistakes like that in life. I was working at a bar in one of the VTCs, offered an old lady $500 to $600 and said, "Wow, you had a good day." She bet 3 times that amount and we went to play. She didn't have any more money to bet, so she just cashed the ticket. The pitching won. Of course, they called me a cheat because I won. But that doesn't matter. I don't gamble with my money. But I remember a woman came up to one of the tables and said, "You're not getting that $9,000 back." The woman walked away from the table like that. I got tired of seeing all these old ladies playing poker at 2 in the morning, so I left. I work at a casino in Niagara Falls and I see people with $1 million all the time. A few nights ago a guy yelled at another female employee. She took his expired platinum card. He started yelling at her to give it back or he would call security and fire her. She ignored him and helped another customer. He was in a panic and said he really wanted his card back. After a few minutes he came to his senses and said he was a regular customer and kept all his old cards as a keepsake. I asked my supervisor what I should do since I would never return an expired card. She checked his game and found that he had lost over $2.5 million, so she returned the card and apologized. I realized that if you spend a lot of money at the casino, you can do whatever you want. I didn't lose any money, so to speak, but I worked at the casino for a while and got to know the regulars well. One lady often came to play the slots, as I'm sure you do. But actually my friend knew her outside of work as well. The customer's husband and my friend's husband knew each other from the porn store where my friend's husband worked. When customers would come in and lose all their money, the husband would go back to the porn shop to try to make money, and the cycle would repeat itself. He really should have taken care of the kids with the money he didn't have. Because of this, I never brought up working at the casino. Some people don't mind, but not being able to help people who are already helpless is really, really bad. What he remembers from his personal experience as a former casino worker was not how he reacted to losing, but how he treated his children when they gambled. They would leave their children to go to other casinos, try to drive by, gamble, or let them leave while they ran to the slot machines. These things I saw stayed with me much longer than the yelling, hitting, etc. that people did when they lost money. I currently work as a table game dealer. Ideally a dealer for 3 games, blackjack, roulette, and craps. There is a bit of a twist to my answer. The first thing that came to my mind was not losing, but winning big. A guy came to my table and told me that his family, wife and kids were at bowling alley and he bought them for $200. Not a lot, but he and I were the only ones at the table anyway. He played some of the best blackjack I've ever played. By the end of the game, he had turned a mere $200 into $10,000. If I remember correctly, he only lost 3 times in the entire hand. Of course, this was a $200 max bet table. This guy talks crap about how well he's doing while drinking like crazy. Cocktail waitresses don't come here very often, but they come often when you pay a $15 tip for a $4 beer, and by the time it took him 1.5 seconds to get to the third shoe, he was pretty drunk. It's perfectly quick. At this point he falls off his chair and yells at me, "I'm going to win." I say, "I hope you win, but don't shit yourself. I don't want to bully you during halftime. We've been good up to this point. We keep each other on our toes and do whatever I want to do. The most fun I have at the table is when I'm half done and the table is enjoying it." He loses his temper and starts yelling at me for being a slacker and calling me SE. At this point I turn to the pit boss, nod slightly and glare at him. They know what that means. A few minutes later a security guard comes up and escorts him with his feet to the door. He's a big winner, he has a drinking problem. I'm a former dealer, so I've seen a lot. The casino I worked at was in a small town in the Midwest, so it was nothing special. The 2 guys who made the biggest impression on me were the 2 guys who were regular customers. One was an older man, very grumpy, but he never gave up no matter how much he lost. What I remember most was that every time he ran out of hands, he blew smoke in my face. He never once smiled at me and always called me a B when he exhaled. I would take offense at him for this and he would do the same thing again the next day. The other player was a couple years older than me. He was a very regular guy, and we had a lot in common, so we became friends outside of work. It was small town, Midwest problems, but he was a serious player. He played all the time, and BJ was terrible at it. He never won once and was always depressed. He went out there every night. When I quit my job, he stopped going there. I hated to see him spiral down. The kind of defeat where he thinks he can make another move and get his money back, but it doesn't happen. In my 10 years as a dealer, floor controller and pit boss, all on the night shift, there have been countless episodes. I once had a fist fight between 2 players over a loss. There were occasional spills on the craps table. My favorite high-limit craps player, when he was losing, would pound his fists on the table, scatter chips across the table, and insult the other players at the table. He always liked me because I was a better dealer and could take his big bets with no problem. He would ask for me and I would be moved to another game I was playing in. I knew that no matter how much he bet, he would always pay me back plus more. He tipped great and I loved talking sports with him. I always knew he would end the evening at PFO. Several people killed themselves in their cars or jumped out of parking lots. One doctor bilked the government out of money for his gambling addiction. He was arrested, but most people were happy because he was anal for most dealers. I saw people screaming at the slot machines when they lost, red-faced. I've also seen a person who hit a slot machine with his fist and cut his hand so badly that the glass shattered. I saw someone faint while standing at my table when I took all his money. He fainted. When I got there he was $1,000 higher, and 6 hours later he was $1,000 lower. He was very cocky when he won, panicked when he lost, and constantly cashed in his credit cards. One man cried while losing and said his wife was going to leave him and he didn't know what to do. He was white, about 35 years old, rude and very demanding. Another guy threw up on the floor after losing big on a double-down all-in. He had 20 and I had 21 with 6 cards. The other player in the game just stared at him after he threw up. He apologized and walked away. A lot of crazy things happened there. This is just a small part of it. Subscribe to our channel here. New videos will be released every day until then. Watch our other videos as well. See you soon.